US Supreme Court has thrown out one of Donald Trump's key initiatives, his attempt to end automatic citizenship for babies born in America. Now, it was one of the first executive orders he signed after returning to the White House, but the justices voted 6-3 in favor of birthright citizenship. Well, Sarah Smith is live outside the Supreme Court in Washington for us now, and this is, no doubt about it, a big blow for Mr. Trump.
Yeah, absolutely, because this was such a priority for Donald Trump. It was actually on his very first day when he returned to the White House that he signed an executive order trying to end birthright citizenship. Now, that was put on hold for legal argument, and after the ruling today, it can never be enforced. And, you know, this is a really significant blow to one of Donald Trump's signature anti-immigration policies. But the justices were very clear. They said that Article 14 of the US Constitution says that all persons born in the United States are citizens of the United States, so that it couldn't be clearer.
What's up, world? This is Dr. John. A unified Supreme Court ending Trump's presidency is fiction. No such moment occurred. The reality is far less dramatic, more complicated, and more interesting than the false narrative circulating online. The headlines have fundamentally distorted what actually happened. Let me take you through what's actually happening, because the truth matters here. Not just for understanding this particular situation, but for understanding how our government actually works. The Supreme Court has indeed issued several significant rulings that have gone against the administration. That part is real. That part is worth discussing. But the way these rulings have been presented, the way they've been bundled together into a single narrative of unified opposition, that's where the fiction begins. The votes were not unanimous. The justices did not all agree. The pattern is not one of unified resistance, but of shifting majorities on different issues.
It's quite unusual, though, for this Supreme Court to rule against what Donald Trump wants. There are 6 conservative justices on the court and 3 more liberal ones, and often they break like that. But in this instance, 3 of the more conservative justices also voted to uphold birthright citizenship. And we've heard from Donald Trump on social media about this. He's suggesting that he could try and introduce legislation in Congress, and if passed, that would overturn the right to birthright citizenship. But because the justices have said that this is a right enshrined in the Constitution, it's difficult to see how he can do that. He was much happier with a different ruling that we also got from the Supreme Court today, which says that states are allowed to ban transgender athletes from competing in female school and college sports. Donald Trump was very happy about that, and he posted on social media that he considered that to be a big win.
Sometimes the court ruled against the administration. Sometimes it ruled for the administration. Sometimes Trump appointees voted against Trump. Sometimes Trump appointees voted with Trump. It's a complicated picture that defies the simple narrative of all 9 justices standing united. Now, let's talk about the specific cases, because this is where the truth really comes into focus. There was a major decision about tariffs. The administration had enacted a sweeping global tariff program using emergency powers laws that were originally designed for situations like wars or natural disasters. The administration argued that these laws gave the president authority to impose tariffs on goods from around the world. Businesses and members of Congress challenged this in court. The case made its way to the Supreme Court, and the court ruled against the administration.
US President Donald Trump has lashed out at the US Supreme Court over rulings against his administration on key policies, including tariffs and birthright citizenship. Trump claims the decisions have cost the US trillions and trillions of dollars, though many critics argue that the president's claims are unsupported. Venting out his anger in a post on Truth Social, Trump accused the court of damaging the country financially by ruling against his positions on tariffs and birthright citizenship. In the birthright citizenship case, the court ruled against him 6-3 on June 30, finding that the policy connected and conflicted with the 14th Amendment and more than a century of legal precedent. The decision was supported by several justices, including Trump appointees Amy Coney Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh, who upheld the constitutional citizenship clause. The clause states that all persons born or naturalized in the U.S. and subject to its jurisdiction are citizens of the country and the state where they reside. In the tariffs case, the court overturned the president's signature economic strategy on February 20.
The court said the emergency powers law did not authorize such broad tariffs. That was a significant defeat for the administration. But look at the vote. It was 6-3, not 9-0. 6 justices agreed with the ruling, 3 justices disagreed and would have sided with the administration. That's not unity. That's a divided court with a clear majority on one side. It's a defeat, certainly, but it's not a unified rebuke from all 9 justices. Then there was the birthright citizenship case. The administration issued an executive order claiming it could end the automatic granting of citizenship to children born on American soil,
concluding that the reciprocal levies he had placed on foreign trading partners had been unlawfully imposed via the International Emergency Economic Powers Act 1977. Justice Barrett and another Trump appointee, Justice Neil Gorsuch, they joined the majority opposing the administration's tariff policy. The decision forced the administration to pay back more than $81 billion of the money it raked under the tax strategy. Despite his criticism of the Supreme Court, President Trump is continuing to seek its intervention in his legal battles. He has asked the court to overturn the $83.3 million defamation verdict awarded to writer E. John Carroll. Trump argued he cannot be held personally liable for statements made while serving as president. Well, the writer had accused Trump in her 2019 memoir of sexually assaulting her in a dressing room in a department store in Manhattan in the mid-1990s. While lower courts have upheld the 2024 verdict, the Supreme Court is now considering whether to hear his appeal. The court also declined in June to hear Trump's appeal of a separate $5 million verdict in Carroll's favor. Trump has repeatedly denied her allegations against him.
The court blocked that executive order. The court said the Constitution's 14th Amendment guarantees birthright citizenship, and the president cannot override that through an executive order. That was another significant defeat. But again, look at the vote. 5 justices agreed with the ruling. 4 justices would have sided with the administration. It was a 5-4 decision. One of the justices who voted against the administration was Amy Coney Barrett, who was appointed to the court by the administration. She voted against the president who appointed her. That's significant. That's worth discussing. But it's not unity. It's a narrow majority on a divided court. 5 justices on one side, 4 on the other. That's about as far from unanimous as you can get. Then there was the Federal Reserve case. The administration wanted to remove a Federal Reserve governor named Lisa Cook. Congress set up the Federal Reserve with protections that limit when and how presidents can remove governors. This is to keep the Federal Reserve independent from political pressure. The court temporarily blocked the administration from removing Cook while the case proceeds. This was a significant action protecting the independence of the Federal Reserve. But it was a temporary order, not a final ruling on the merits. And it wasn't all 9 justices. It was a preliminary decision while the underlying case continues. The full court hasn't even ruled on whether the administration can ultimately remove Cook. So presenting this as evidence of unified opposition is misleading when the court hasn't even made a final decision yet. Now here's the part that the sensational headlines completely ignore. The administration has also won major cases at the Supreme Court. The court has sided with the administration on questions about presidential power to remove leaders of independent agencies. The court has sided with the administration on policies regarding Haitian migrants. The administration has victories alongside its defeats. This is normal. This is how the Supreme Court works. Different cases have different outcomes based on the specific legal issues involved. The court is not uniformly for or against any administration. The court evaluates each case individually, applies the law as the justices understand it, and reaches decisions that sometimes favor the administration and sometimes don't. Think about what it would actually mean if all 9 justices stood united against the administration. It would mean every case was decided against the administration. It would mean the administration had no victories at the Supreme Court. But that's not what happened. The administration has won important cases. The administration has lost important cases. The pattern is mixed. The pattern is complicated. The pattern is exactly what you would expect from a court with different justices who have different legal philosophies and different views on different issues. The idea that all 9 justices are somehow united against the administration ignores the reality of how the court actually operates. Let me talk about Justice Kagan's comment because it's been widely cited in this discussion. Justice Kagan said the court is not a rubber stamp for the administration. She said the court will sometimes rule against the administration. That's true. That's accurate. The court has ruled against the administration in several significant cases. But Justice Kagan wasn't saying the court is always against the administration. She wasn't saying the court is united against the administration. She was saying the court evaluates cases independently and sometimes says no. That's a very different statement from saying the court is uniformly opposed. And Justice Kagan's comment would apply to any administration. Courts are supposed to check executive power regardless of who's in charge. That's the system working as designed, not a unified rebellion against a particular president. The administration's response to these court defeats is also revealing. After the tariff decision, the administration looked for new legal ways to pursue tariff policies. The administration didn't give up on tariffs, it just shifted tactics. After the birthright citizenship decision, the administration has not pursued that policy further through that particular avenue. But the administration could try other approaches in the future. The administration has not abandoned its goals. It has just learned that some methods don't work and it needs to find different legal paths. This is normal. This is how administrations respond to court defeats. They find new legal authorities, they ask Congress for help, they pursue different strategies. The fact that the administration is still governing, still pursuing its policies through different means, shows that the court defeats haven't ended the administration or prevented it from governing. Now let me address the Chief Justice's statement because that's another piece of this story that's been misinterpreted. Chief Justice John Roberts made a rare statement after the president called for the impeachment of a federal judge. The Chief Justice said that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreements about judicial decisions. He said the normal appellate process exists for that purpose. This was a significant statement. The Chief Justice doesn't make statements like this often, and it was clearly a response to the president's criticism of a judge who had ruled against the administration. But here's what this statement actually means. The Chief Justice was defending the independence of the judiciary. He was saying that judges shouldn't be impeached just because a president disagrees with their rulings. He was defending the principle that courts should be able to make decisions without fear of retaliation. That's an important principle. It's worth defending. But it's not the same as all 9 justices standing united against the president. It's one Chief Justice making a statement about judicial independence. That's very different from the dramatic narrative that's been circulating. The president responded to the Chief Justice's statement with criticism of his own. The president said judges shouldn't be able to block the administration's policies. The president continued to argue that the court was overstepping. This shows that the tension between the administration and the judiciary is real. There's genuine conflict here. The administration wants to move quickly on its priorities. The courts are saying, hold on, you need to follow the law. The administration thinks the courts are blocking legitimate executive action. The courts think they're doing their job of checking executive power. This conflict is real and it's significant, but it's not the same as a unified Supreme Court ending the administration. It's a normal constitutional tension playing out in real time. Let me also address the role of Justice Barrett specifically, because her votes have been a focus of attention. Justice Barrett was appointed by the administration, and in the birthright citizenship case, she voted against the administration. The president has criticized her for this. The president has essentially said she betrayed him by not voting his way. But this shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how the Supreme Court works. Justices aren't supposed to be loyal to the presidents who appoint them. They're supposed to interpret the law as they understand it. They're supposed to vote based on their legal philosophy and their understanding of the Constitution. Justice Barrett has explained that she votes based on the Constitution as written. She doesn't vote based on political outcomes or loyalty to any administration. That's how Supreme Court justices are supposed to work. They take an oath to uphold the Constitution, not to support the president who appointed them. So when the president criticizes Justice Barrett for voting against him, he's revealing that he misunderstands the role of the Supreme Court. The justices don't work for the president, they work for the Constitution and the law. Now let me talk about what all of this means in practical terms. The Supreme Court has limited some specific administration actions. The tariff program was struck down through one particular legal avenue. The birthright citizenship executive order was blocked. The Federal Reserve removal was temporarily stopped. These are real defeats that matter, but they don't end the administration. They don't prevent the administration from governing. They just require the administration to find different legal paths to achieve its goals. The administration can still pursue tariffs through other legal mechanisms. The administration can ask Congress to pass laws about citizenship. The administration can pursue different strategies regarding the Federal Reserve. The administration has options. The court decisions close off some options but leave others open. This is how the system is supposed to work. The president pushes the boundaries of executive power. The courts push back when the boundaries are exceeded. Then the president finds different ways to pursue the same goals within the boundaries. This is the normal operation of checks and balances in our constitutional system. The bigger picture here is about separation of powers. The courts are checking some executive power. Congress could pass legislation that addresses these issues. The administration is finding new approaches. This is how our government is supposed to work. No single branch has unlimited power. Each branch checks the others. The tension we're seeing is a feature, not a bug. It's the system working as designed. The problem is when media takes this complicated, nuanced process and presents it as a dramatic, unified rebellion against a president. That's not accurate. That's not honest. That's sensationalism designed to get clicks and shares. And it does a disservice to everyone trying to understand what's actually happening. Let me be clear about what the headlines claim versus what actually happened. The headline says the administration's reign ends. That's false. The administration is still governing. The administration is still pursuing its policies. The administration has not been removed from office. The Supreme Court decisions don't end the presidency or prevent the administration from governing. The headline says all Supreme Court justices stand united against the administration. That's false. The justices don't all agree. The decisions involve 6-3 votes, 5-4 votes, and other split votes. Some Trump appointees voted against the administration in some cases. Some Trump appointees voted with the administration in other cases. The justices are not united. The votes are not unanimous. The headline says the administration has lost all cases or that every case went against the administration. That's false. The administration has won major Supreme Court cases in this same time period. The court ruled in the administration's favor on presidential removal power. The court ruled in the administration's favor on Haitian migrant policy. The administration has Supreme Court victories alongside its Supreme Court defeats. So what is actually true? The Supreme Court has issued several significant decisions limiting some administration policies. This is true. The tariff decision struck down a major initiative. The birthright citizenship decision blocked an important executive order. The Federal Reserve case temporarily blocked a removal action. These are real defeats that matter. And yes, this matters because it shows the Supreme Court will sometimes rule against the administration, even though the court has a conservative majority. Justice Kagan was making this point when she said, "The court is not a rubber stamp. The court will sometimes say no. This is meaningful and significant." But this is very different from saying all justices stand united against the administration or that the administration's reign is ending. The Supreme Court is not uniformly against the administration. The justices vote different ways on different cases. The pattern is complicated and issue-specific, not a unified rebellion. Let me also explain the emergency powers law and the tariff case because this is a significant constitutional issue. The emergency powers law gives presidents authority to declare national emergencies and take actions that would normally require Congress. The law was supposed to be used for genuine emergencies, like wars or natural disasters. Presidents over time have used it for increasingly broader purposes. The administration used the Emergency Powers Law to try to impose tariffs without going through the normal congressional process. The administration argued tariffs were necessary for national security. The Supreme Court ruled this was not authorized by the Emergency Powers Law. The court said the law does not give presidents this kind of broad authority over tariffs and trade policy. The court said Congress retains control over tariff authority, and the president cannot use emergency powers to override congressional authority. This is a significant ruling about presidential power. The court said emergency powers cannot be used for regular policymaking that Congress has authority over. This limits how presidents can use emergency powers. But it doesn't prevent presidents from using other legal authorities or asking Congress for authorization. So the tariff policy is blocked through this particular approach. But the administration could pursue tariffs through other legal mechanisms. Let me also explain the Federal Reserve case, because this involves an important principle about independent agencies. Congress created the Federal Reserve and gave it independence from direct presidential control. The Federal Reserve is supposed to make monetary policy decisions without worrying about presidential political pressure. The idea is that monetary policy is too important to be left to political considerations. Congress limited when and how presidents can remove Federal Reserve governors. This is to protect the independence of the Federal Reserve. The administration wanted to remove a Biden appointee who the administration disagreed with. The court temporarily blocked this removal, protecting the Fed's independence and limiting the administration's ability to politicize the Federal Reserve. But this temporary blocking is not a final ruling on the merits. The case is still proceeding. There may be different legal theories about whether the administration can ultimately remove the governor. But the temporary blocking shows courts are willing to protect the Federal Reserve's independence even against presidential removal power. This matters because it shows the courts are willing to check presidential power in specific contexts where Congress has created independent agencies. Now let me address why this all matters beyond just the specific cases. The Supreme Court has shown it will place limits on some major administration actions. The court has checked some presidential power in specific areas. This is a meaningful development about the balance of power between branches. But the administration is still governing. The administration is still pursuing its policies. The administration is finding new legal approaches after defeats. The administration is not shut down or prevented from governing. The administration has just learned that some policies require finding different legal paths or working with Congress. This is how the Constitution is supposed to work. Presidents should have to work within legal and constitutional limits. Presidents should not be able to do everything they want through executive order. Congress should retain authority over some areas. Courts should be willing to block unconstitutional executive actions. The administration is responding to court defeats by finding new approaches. Rather than give up on tariffs, they're finding different legal authorities. Rather than give up on immigration policy, they're finding different legal approaches. This is how politics and law work together in our system. The media's misleading headlines about justices standing united against the administration do a disservice to understanding what's actually happening. The actual story is more interesting and more important. It's a story about how the courts check executive power. It's a story about how different justices approach the law differently. It's a story about how administrations find new legal approaches after defeats. Understanding the real story helps you understand how our government actually works. Media sensationalism just creates false impressions that don't match reality. Being able to read past sensational headlines to understand what's actually happening is essential to being an informed citizen in a democracy. Let me also add one more important point about Justice Kagan's comment. When she said the court is not a rubber stamp for the administration, she was speaking about the court's role in checking executive power. But this comment applies to all administrations, not just this one. Courts are supposed to check executive power regardless of who is president. This is about institutional balance, not about any specific president. So when the administration wins Supreme Court cases, it's also benefiting from courts respecting executive authority in those areas. When the administration loses Supreme Court cases, courts are fulfilling their role of checking executive power. This is how the system is designed to work. The problem is when media takes these issue-specific rulings and presents them as one unified story. The problem is when media suggests courts are uniformly against a president, when actually courts make different rulings on different issues based on the legal merits. Understanding this distinction means understanding that Supreme Court rulings are about law and constitution, not about being for or against any particular president. The court is supposed to be above politics, even though partisanship influences judges. The court is supposed to apply law neutrally. When you read sensational headlines about justices standing united against the administration, you should ask yourself if this is actually what happened or if this is media sensationalism. The accurate answer is that the justices have ruled differently on different cases with varying majorities and different judges voting different ways. That is not united. That's a divided court making different decisions on different issues. And that's how it's supposed to work.